Innistrad Crimson Vow's spoiler season is starting off strong. We have a bunch of interesting new abilities, powerful mythic rares, and on top of that, Crimson Vow includes Dracula-themed magic cards.
Magic.
I am a wizard!
History.
I'm an old wizard!
The Magic Historian.
My bones hurt. Greetings! Owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles, my friends, I hope the day finds you well because we have gathered to talk about a bunch of fun Innistrad Crimson Vow spoilers. The set is shaping up to be interesting. Like I said, we've got a number of new abilities to talk about, some powerful mythics, and on top of that, we've got this right here, this weird beast, Dracula, in a Magic the Gathering set. I mean, when we're talking about a vampire from like old lore who's been told, his story has been told a number of different times, it makes sense to have him show up in the vampire-themed set. So, let's talk about how the Dracula concept works. First of all, since it is the most obviously eye-catching part about what's going on with today's spoilers. So the idea behind this is they are essentially reskins, okay? So take a look at this. This says Count Dracula, but then right below Count Dracula, it says Sorin the Mirthless. So the name in the lower box there is actually the genuine Magic card name. It's funny how at first glance you might look at this and go, was this some kind of like fan-made concept? What exactly am I looking at? Well, you're looking at a dude who probably has a man bun and wants to take you to his exclusive restaurant where you can pay thousands of dollars for gold-covered meat. That's the way he looks to me. When I first saw the card, I was like, wait, is that a genuine Magic card? And then I realized, oh, they're actually doing a Dracula concept. So this is a fun idea overall. Now, these cards will show up specifically in set boosters, set booster boxes, I should say, and collector boosters. So there'll be box toppers for the set boxes, and then usually what they do with box toppers is they include them in like box toppers with the collector box, and then also you can get them individually if they do it the same way they did for Zendikar Rising. So this is the Dracula version of Sorin, but instead of going through his abilities on this version, take a look at the artwork. Definitely has a Dracula vampire feel to it, right? So that works overall. But I have the actual Sorin, so we can talk about him as a Magic the Gathering card now that we've covered the Dracula concept. So this is Sorin the Mirthless, looking very much like, I don't know, the cover of a romance novel almost. As I stared into his dark, undead eyes, my heart was aflutter. All right, so 2 black and 2 for a legendary Planeswalker known as Sorin. His first ability, +1, look at the top card of your library. You may reveal that card and put it into your hand. If you do, you lose life equal to its mana value. -2 loyalty, create a 2/3 black vampire creature token with flying and lifelink, and -7, Sorin the Mirthless deals 13 damage to any target, you gain 13 life. And he starts with 4 loyalty. Now this guy to me seems pretty potent overall as a card. I feel like this is pretty strong. I mean, at 4 mana, it might be right on the cusp because depending on how the meta's going, the event can be like really fast in terms of like overall gameplay. Boom, 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 and you're done, right? So he may not be fast enough. Who knows 100%? But when I look at his abilities, the first ability is just feeding cards into your hand at a cost of life. And we all know that paying life for cards isn't that bad a deal, right? That resource trade usually works out in your favor. Then that's like the loyalty increasing is feeding cards into your hand. -2 is really solid. You create the 2/3 black vampire creature token that has flying and lifelink, which means you're going to be able to gain life back that you may have lost with the first ability, but also, importantly, works as a chump blocker to get you to Sorin's ultimate. Because Sorin's ultimate only requires you to have 7 loyalty, which means you can basically boost him up a few different times. You can have the token out kind of to get in the way if you want. Obviously, it'd be better if it was a +2 and make the token, but that'd be pretty bonkers, right? It'd just be like, I'll activate it twice, make 2 tokens, and go ultimate. But either way, it can defend Sorin. Like, you can get one of these tokens out, and it can defend Sorin either as a chump blocker or just keeping things out of the way while gaining you life, and you can keep drawing cards while building up to the ultimate. It feels great. And this is a special stylized version. I don't know if you guys noticed that. You've got the like the showcase style setup frame here with the wedding concept, because Crimson Vow has that wedding concept. So you know what, he does look like he's chilling at a wedding. I like the black and white aspect of it. I will admit that the border at the top that they gave it, it's like a variation of the legendary border, but it just feels kind of like a Batman symbol. It really gives me heavy Batman vibes, but what are you going to do, right? Vampires are intrinsically tied to bats, so unavoidable sort of, correlation. Now, let us move on to the next card we're going to look at today. That is, by invitation only, an incredibly interesting board wipe variation of Wrath of God. 2 white and 3, for a sorcery that says choose a number between 0 and 13. Each player sacrifices that many creatures. So it's interesting on a couple different levels. First of all, it's scalability. Like when you think about it, in most cases, nobody is going to have 13 creatures on the board, let alone more than that. Sure, people who crank insane amount of tokens will go, haha, you don't know what you're talking about, I make 1 billion creatures. But for most games of Magic, you are not going to see people get up to 13 creatures. The game's usually over by then. But if you have more creatures than your opponent, this turns into a one-sided wrath. You can either do the full complement of 13 creatures and go, boom, let's wipe the whole board unless you're a token freak. Or you can go, oh, hey, I happen to notice that you have 2 creatures, and I have 4 creatures. Let's go, everybody sacks 2 creatures. Oh, look at this. It's interesting because the effect feels both black and white at the same time, which makes sense for like a vampire-ish kind of feel, like they've done white-black Sorins and stuff like that. So I really like the idea in that regard. And the flavor text says, the red envelopes guaranteed safe passage through the Lurimbrom barrier. Olivia left strict instructions: no invitation, no entry, no exceptions. And this is a story spotlight card. So this is one of the events in the story. You want to come to the Crimson Wedding? Well, you got to go through the marshmallow flames that are going to cook you up if you don't have an invitation. I mean, that's pretty intense overall. All right, now, what do we have next? We have the Savior of Allenbach, which feels like almost a little bit of a contradiction to me overall with the flavor concept behind it, but it is a very solid card. 2 white and 1. For a 1/2 human soldier, it has the ability Training. Now, we've seen similar abilities to this, right, with the Boros Legion, but this is a new ability that says whenever this creature attacks with another creature with greater power, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So you could have a bunch of 1/1s with Training, and if they all attack together with a 2/2, they will all get their Training bonus. So Training automatically gives a +1/+1 counter, and that's the most simple version. But Savior of Allenbach takes it a step further, because whenever Savior of Allenbach trains, exile up to 1 other target creature from the battlefield or creature card from a graveyard. And when it leaves the battlefield, you bring the exiled cards back into play. So essentially, the idea is this guy is like almost a walking variation of the standard issue white enchantment that we have nowadays that says exile a permanent until this enchantment goes away. So the Savior, if you can have him train with bigger, beefier guys, he will learn, and while he's growing in power, he's also incapacitating the enemies of the village. So for me, the whole idea of calling him a Savior at first is funny because he's 1/2, right? And he has to train up. But ultimately, when you think of a trained up version of him, then he works as a Savior because he's bigger, he's beefier, and he's removed a bunch of threats. There's something about the artwork that makes it feel to me like this guy is doing it's take an old school we're gonna fight each other style game from the Super Nintendo era, right? He just feels like I am Chakram Warrior, but he's like a guy cosplaying it. He's cosplaying a character from a Super Nintendo game 20 years later. I don't know what it is. His stance and the weaponry and maybe the stripe down his head. He doesn't intimidate me. He looks silly, and I do actually have genuine questions in terms of flavor of how does he incapacitate people and keep them out of the battle until he's gone? Does he just keep them locked up in a hut, and it's like, nobody's going to get the key until I'm gone. There's a little bit of disconnect with the flavor, but ultimately I think this guy is really powerful, right? Like, legit. There's a reason he's mythic. All you have to do is swing with creatures that are bigger than him. Him starting with a power 1 means it's going to be very easy to do that. And every time you do that, he's going to grow in power while removing your opponent's creatures that are in the way. So this feels like you could easily plow through your opponent's board state. I feel like this is going to make a real impact. Time will tell, right? Who knows? But this card to me feels like you're first going to go, all right. But over time, the value you're going to get from it, magnificent. Next up, we've got Overcharged Amalgam, showing us another new keyword. I tried to select cards that illustrated the different keywords. So 2 blue and 2 for a 3/3 zombie horror. It's got flash, it's got flying, it's got exploit, because Wizards of the Coast loves exploitation. All right, so exploit is a new ability, or I guess really just a way of codifying an ability that's existed in Magic the Gathering on a number of different cards. So exploit is when this creature enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a creature. We've seen similar abilities, like Devour, for example, from Magic's history, allows you to sacrifice creatures to gain a bonus. But Devour allows you to eat any amount of dudes. Exploit only allows you to use 1. So, what happens when you exploit in this case? Well, when Overcharged Amalgam exploits a creature, you get to counter target spell, activated ability, or triggered ability. So, under optimal conditions, this guy is basically a 4-mana, 3/3 flash speed flyer. You have to sack a creature when you cast him, but you get to counter a spell, activated, or triggered ability. That is a nice little range. Just being able to counter a spell on him would already feel pretty solid. But when you put in the fact that it can be a activated ability or a triggered ability, that adds an extra level. A lot of the time, you will see counter target spell or activated ability. You won't really see activated ability and triggered ability together with counter a spell. Although it does feel like over recent times, they're making a shift towards more of that. Anyways, it's a really cool concept. This is like a supercharged up zombie horror, and this is one of the blue zombies, and the blue zombies are done more in the Frankenstein monster, where you have them all stitched together and cobbled out of a number of different beasts. So you have this zombie horror that's already been made, and when it shows up, you can immediately feed the living essence of another being into it, and then the zombie horror just like, the energy is flowing through it, and it just channels it into pure destruction, but of an arcane nature. So instead of just like blunt force, you're destroying magic. So it's just shrieking out its like rage and pain as it obliterates magic at the same time. Very cool concept, and exploit feels like a perfectly reasonable keyword. I do wonder if they're going to use that going forwards, because sometimes Wizards of the Coast will use a keyword just for a set, as opposed to making it a permanent ongoing part of the game. Although it does seem like in recent times, they're looking more and more to keyword things like this in an attempt to save space on cards, right? Because Magic cards are getting wordier and wordier. And for a guy who talks so much, that works out pretty well, because I'm really wordy too. Next up, we've got Demonic Bargain. This is a cool card. And a weird one. 1 black and 2 for a sorcery. Exile the top 13 cards of your library, then search your library for a card, put that card into your hand, then shuffle. The flavor text says, "Do not try to negotiate with me, human. You want power? This is the price." I love that. And that's Ormondal. He's one of the 4 demons that made a demonic contract with Liliana. And you can see the artwork's absolutely incredible. You've got this demonic head in this basin, and you've got this woman with her head tilted, and blood is leaking out of her mouth into this basin, and the demon is coming up out of it. Its horns are all curling out, and it's got its eyes like kind of closed in a gleeful way. I just love it. She's asleep while the demon's awake, and it's a very interesting take on the concept of if you want power, you have to pay for it. A lot of times, that power will be paid for in blood and flesh, right? Either you have to give up your life, like lose life, give up a creature, whatever it is. But in this case, you're giving up like part of your mind. So the demons fracture in your mind. And it's an interesting sort of tutor because if you need a particular card and you exile the top 13 cards of your library, like if you think about it, you're going to start with 7 cards in your hand, right? And then after you've drawn 3 more cards, that's most likely when you're going to have the mana to cast it. You're going to have about 50 cards left in your deck, right? Or maybe even 45 or less. But you're going to get to the point where when you cast this, you're going to lose anywhere from like 10%, or actually more than 10%, 15 to 25% of your deck basically is going to go. So you're going to lose 13 cards, and the answer you need could easily be in there. And the idea of making like a deal with a demon where you have a particular goal, but that goal is completely stymied and ruined by the fact that the method that you used to take the goal ruined it for you. Oh, it's just beautiful. The flavor concept is amazing. So I really like this as a card. After that, we've got Voldaren Bloodcaster showing off another new mechanic, or another new token. 1 black and 1 for a 2/1. Whenever Voldaren Bloodcaster or another non-token creature you control dies, create a blood token. It's an artifact with 1 and tap, discard a card, sacrifice this artifact, draw a card. So blood tokens are like a variation of clue token where they cost less to activate, but you have to discard a card. And I have to admit that ultimately that doesn't feel as good. I mean, it can be useful in particular strategies where you want to be discarding cards, where your mana situations are far more tight and you need to like, oh, I can't afford to be paying 2 or whatever. But ultimately the token on itself is disappointing. And I feel like how interesting the actual like token is going to be is really going to depend on the cards that support it, right? Because clue tokens have a number of cards now from a number of different sets. Blood tokens feel far more specific. Now, Voldaren Bloodcaster's ability is whenever you create a blood token, if you control 5 or more blood tokens, transform Voldaren Bloodcaster. And I just realized that I did not include the flip side for this video. So I'm going to put the other side up on the screen right now in editing afterwards, and I'm going to pretend like I remember what it does. Okay, come on, man. What does it do? Pretty sure it makes blood bats. So it's like, every time you make a blood token, if you have 3, maybe you can pay some mana, and then you make a blood token into a 2/2 bat. I can't believe I forgot the other side of this, but either way, I'm gonna say 2/2 bat, 3 tokens, pay something. All right, that's my guess. It's on the screen now. Ooh, look at it. I mean, I'll tell you this right now. I know it's a 3/3. I know it's a 3/3. Anyhow, I'm super professional. Let's move on to the next spoiler card. All right, Dig Up, illustrating another new ability. 1 green for a sorcery that has Cleave. Now, this is a really weirdly named ability and a strange idea. So Cleave is 1, 2 black and green for this. And Cleave works like this. You may cast this spell for its Cleave cost. If you do, remove the words in square brackets. So we're almost getting into like math formula style stuff right here. So you either do one of 2 things. If you just pay 1 green and cast it for its normal cost, then you search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. But if you play the cleave cost, if you pay the cleave cost, then you ignore what's in the brackets. So then you go search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Now this is an interesting way to make a card useful later game. At the beginning of the game, in the first turn, you can play Dig Up and you can go and grab yourself a land, right? And then later on, when grabbing a land wouldn't mean anything because you've got a bunch of lands and it's not nearly as good, well, now you can play it for its cleave cost and go and tutor for anything. I feel like this is really solid. Flavor text says, things buried on Innistrad rarely seem to stay that way. And then you got a little, I don't know, a little dirt crawfish going, hey, what's up? I'm a golden crawfish. You hungry? You wanna eat me? I don't know exactly what's going on here. All right, next up, we got Grolnok the Omnivore. He's included because I want to talk about Croak tokens. So, Grolnok, 1 blue, 1 green, and 2 for a 3/3 legendary frog. Whenever a frog you control attacks, mill 3 cards. That's put 3 cards into your graveyard. off your top of your deck. Whenever a permanent card is put into your graveyard from your library, exile it with a Croak counter on it. So anything you mill off the top of your deck that happens to be a permanent, it gets exiled with a Croak counter on it, and you may play lands and cast spells from among cards you own in exile with Croak counters on them. Not too shabby, giving you access to stuff that gets fed into your graveyard straight off of your deck. Seems really cool to me. I like it. I like the idea behind it. He's just a big old legendary frog who will eat anything. He's like, I'm down. What you got to eat? I will eat it. He just stores it all. Anything. He's like, I'll eat it. And then you're like, Grolnok, come on, man. I wanted to cast that vampire lady. And Grolnok's like, no problem. And he just blorps. Like, he just spits her back up. There's your vampire boss. There, it's like, yeah. Like, that's amazing. It's just so silly and fun. I love it. Anyways, let's move on. There is a cycle of all 5 like enemy colored lands like this. I figured I would just show you one to be representative of them, and because this one's absolutely beautiful. Look at that artwork, man. Doesn't that look great? Doesn't that look great? So, enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. So, if you try and put it as one of your early lands, comes into play tapped. Otherwise, you're good to go. Gives you a green or blue. Flavor text says, Soothing Whispers invite travelers to step closer, 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 until they vanish soundlessly beneath the surface. This is a beautiful place to lose your life. You go in, and the geists are there in the waters, and they lure you in like sirens almost. Very, very cool. Very flavorful. Moving on. We've got Olivia, Crimson Bride. She's ready for a wedding. 1 red, 1 black, and 4 for a 3/4 vampire noble. She's got flying and haste. She's solid. Whenever Olivia Crimson Bride attacks, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped and attacking. It gains whenever you don't control a legendary vampire, exile this creature. So this is pretty wild. You know what I mean? You look at this and go, wait. So you can cast it, swing with it right away, bring any creature back from your graveyard, and that creature is tapped and attacking and doesn't go away at the end of the turn. That creature sticks around until you don't have a legendary vampire. So if you if you just have out Olivia, then they can answer it. They can just go, boom, get rid of her. She's off the board. And as soon as she goes, the creature back from the graveyard goes too. But if you have multiple legendary vampires, let's say you've got out Edgar or some other card we haven't seen yet, you know what I mean? Then you get to keep the creature. It's crazy. It's this sort of like resurrection concept that is pretty, it seems like a step beyond when it comes to vampiric powers. Like, you'd think she'd be able to take people who were like alive and convert them into vampires. It's pretty nuts, man. And when it brings the creature back from the graveyard, it doesn't turn them into a vampire. But either way, the style of this frame looks really cool with multicolor. With the whole red and black, I'm able to look at it in a way that doesn't actually make me think of Batman. So depending on the card it's on, I think it's going to work out pretty well. Speaking of working out pretty well, my friends, there's a brand new lore video over on my Fantasy Geographic channel. It's Innistrad lore. It's absolutely enjoyable, so I invite you to come check it out. It's on the screen right now. Big thanks to my patrons. Hope you enjoyed the video. See you next time.